Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jody, and this is part 2 of my Davenport for Midnight Lace quilt. This is the pattern, and the quilt, the center part of the quilt is on the wall behind me. I still have to put on my last corner, and I have a few tips on how I make my side setting triangles and my corner setting triangles fit into the quilt without using pins, and without losing the 1/4 inch seam allowance on the edge. So I'll move the camera down and I will show you how I do it, and we'll see how it goes. So hold on to your hats. Here we go. Okay, to make your side setting triangles, there's 2 ways that I know of. You can do like I did, or how the pattern had me do it, or you can use this Fons and Porter easy diagonal set ruler. So what the pattern had me do was I cut a large square and I cut it diagonally twice. So here's an example of what I had. It was this big square and I cut it diagonally twice. So now I have straight of grain on the outside, and in the center is bias. The corner setting triangle was a square that was cut diagonally once, which is here. So this will be up in the corner of my quilt. I have straight of grain, and only one bias strip, or one bias edge. So that way on the outside of my quilt, I have all straight of grain. So let me show you the second way to make the side setting triangles, or these with the ruler, is you cut a strip with the fabric, and then the ruler tells you what size to cut your strip, and you will cut along here and just keep going down, and that will get you these. That's basically what this is. And then to get your corner setting triangle, you just set the ruler this way and you can get your corner square or corner setting triangle that way. So let me show you how I mark mine, and this will be my tip for making setting triangles. So hold please. Now I want to show you how I mark my setting triangles so that I don't have to use pins or I don't have to fold anything. So I actually have a ruler that's the size of my block. So I'm going to use this to mark my setting triangles. And you want to be really careful about your bias edges. Consider them delicate and fragile. So the less you touch them, the better. So what I do is I turn this over. I lay my ruler on top along these edges. I take a mechanical pencil and I mark the size of my block. I think I can see that. I think you can see it here. So I've marked a line, and then let me do this to the other one, my other side setting. I think you can see. Move this up a little there. I lay this on my side setting triangle. I line up my edges. I mark with my pencil a line and a line. And then for my corner setting triangle, I'm going to lay this with the bias edge out here. I'm going to find the center part of my block size. So if I had a 10-inch block, I would be looking for if it was 10.5-inch unfinished, I would look for my 5 1/4 spot. If this was a 7.5-inch unfinished block, I would look for 3.5, 3 3/4 line. So I'm going to find the center of mine, which will be 4.5, 4 3/4. And I'm going to put that 4 3/4 line on my point. So there's my point. I'm going to line up my edges, get them straight, 4 1/4 straight, and I mark on both ends. So now you can see I've got 2 marks. So now when I go to sew this onto my block, I'm going to turn, let's see, this sits this way. I got to get this straight in my head. These sit this way on the quilt. So I'm going to lay this over. I'm going to line up my corner, and then where this line is, I'm going to match up the edge of my block. I hope that makes sense. So when I sew it, I'm going to start in this corner, and my block should meet this line over here. So let me sew this real quick, and I'll come back to you. Okay, I'm at the sewing machine. So I have lined up the corner with my block, and then my line that I drew is going to be even with my block edge. So it'll be even there. So let me lay this on here straight, and these are my pins. So if I have to tug my block just a little to get it to work, hold it down. And then I take my other pins, and in various spots of my block, I will hold while I sew down the edge. One moment. Back stitch at the end. And so now my block is even, and it's down here with the line even. So let me fold this over and press. And I didn't chop off any of my points, so let me press. And again, I press, I don't iron. Push that down. So now I'm going to put on my other side setting triangle, which goes this direction. So I'm going to fold this back over. And this time I'm going to start where my line is that I drew, even with my block edge. So I'll put that there. And I will put this under the needle. Hold that in there. Put the foot down, take a couple stitches, back stitch once. Okay, then I will take my corner and I will line up with the edge of my block. Make sure if I have to pull anything, I don't pull the top bias. I will tug at my block underneath. Hold that down. Take my pins, my fingers to hold that edge next to my block and to keep the seams that are underneath from flipping, and we go. the end and back stitch. So here you can see I ended at the edge of my block and I started with my block even with the line I drew. So let me press this. Okay, so now I'm ready to put on my corner setting triangle, this one. And so I don't cut off my dog ears yet. These little things sticking up, I leave them on because I need them. So when I flip this over, sometimes people will fold this and then fold the block, but I don't like to do that because it distorts this a little bit. So what I do is I line up the line I drew with the seam allowance, not the seam, but the seam allowance, the edge of the seam allowance there. See, I think you can see that there. So it's lined up with the dog ears outer side. So I'm not lining up the seam, I'm lining up with the outer edge of that seam allowance. And then I will start sewing there, and when I get to the other end, I will end the same way with the line in the seam allowance, not the seam. So let me sew that real quick. And line up that seam allowance. Put this under the needle. Take a couple stitches. Back stitch once. And then I will line up this edge with the seam allowance. Take my finger pins. At various points, I line up the edge of this so that my edges match, and then I sew. Get to the end, back stitch. So now you can see my line is even with my dog ear. This line ended even with my dog ear. So now I can press. And press this real quick. So now I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance at my points. I didn't chop any of my block off. Got my 1/4 inch there. I didn't cut any of my points off. So we're good to go. So now I can sew this onto my next row. So let me go get that real quick. Okay, I've got my next row on the quilt. And now I'm going to take this line that I drew and I'm going to line it up with the dog ear, not the seam allowance, but with the, or not the seam, but the seam allowance. So let me put this on here. Let me line that up. So as we did before, my line matches my dog ear, the seam allowance, not the seam, but the seam allowance. So let me put this under the needle and I will show you how I sew this row with no pins other than my fingers. Put that on there, take a couple stitches, back stitch once. Okay. So frustrated, I had a seam flip, but I ain't gonna worry about it. So now I'm going to, the way I've pressed this seam here will butt up against this seam. So that's going to be my first finger pin, is to make sure that those match. So line that up, make sure they're up against each other, and I hold. Then I line up with my other fingers. See if you can see this. So I've got this held where my blocks meet. I'm going to hold this in various spots so that my edges of my blocks meet, and then I sew. Getting close to the end, I want to make sure that that's up there, butt it up against it, and sew. One block on. Now I go to the next one, make sure that the block matches the next block's seam. I butt up them seams together, hold it, line up the edges, and using my finger pins, line up the edges and sew. Get close to the end, make sure it still matches. And sew. And the last one, got to put my point on, got to be careful because that's bias. So I line up my seam allowance with my line. And hold it. Line up my edges. And hold them down. And sew. Backstitch. And so now that row ended with my line on my dog ear seam allowance. It started the same way. So now I can press this real quick. And iron or press. So now I have my corner done. Let me move the camera up here a little. I have my corner all pieced together. My seams are all matching. Using my finger pins. And I have my 1/4 inch seam allowances intact. And so I only have this bias edge down here and this one left. And when I sew the next row on, those will be secure. So that's how I do it. So I hope that made sense. But yeah, I don't like using pins because I think that when you pin, it kind of tugs the fabric. And I've seen where, you can take this and you can fold it and then you fold your block and then you match the crease. And I just think that this is more accurate, at least for me it is. So that's my tip on the corner setting seams and my side setting seams. So in the next video, I'm going to work on, I don't have a ruler with me, but that diagonal set ruler. I think I'm going to be able to use that, at least in my head, I'm thinking, to miter that border. I think I'm going to be able to do that with my pencil and a tiny bit of Elmer's glue. So we'll see if I can do it. I might have a whole freaking mess or something. I don't know. Who knows? It may not work. So stay tuned. We'll see if I can do it. Hope you're having a good day. Stay safe. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Bye for now.